we won't start formally, but Adrian, why don't you go first and introduce yourself?
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Adrian. I'm from New York. My parents are from the Dominican Republic. I'm 17. I'm a freshman here for mechanical engineering, but interested in entrepreneurship and computer science.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alvisa. I'm a junior. I'm from Kosovo and I'm studying computer science and economics here, and I'm the social media intern here at Veale.
If she gets in your face with her phone.
Hi, I'm Mock. I'm a senior, physics and math major. I wanted to do PhD and then not for me. Right now, I'm looking at finance jobs. I interned at a PE this summer. I'm starting my entrepreneurship, physics and entrepreneurship program. Right now, it's a master's program, so I'll be staying for one more year at case.
Hi, my name is Almas. I'm sophomore studying biomedical engineering. I work in Thinkbox as outreach assistant. So you might see me on the second floor.
Where are you from?
I'm from Crimea, Ukraine. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Celine. I'm a junior studying chemical engineering. I'm from Taiwan. I'm an exchange student here, like one of the 20-something exchange student in Case Western right now. And I've basically met Michael Gilbert and Alvisa in Taiwan in July, and they introduced me this amazing place. So I'm here. I'm so
And we're making her come to every event.
I'm just saying entrepreneurship.
Hey, Stacey, I think there's some more
Sorry.
people out there. Yeah. No, I need more chairs. Yeah, come on in, guys. Great, Tedros.
My name is Tedros. I'm a rising sophomore studying finance, business management with a concentration in innovation and entrepreneurship. I started my own business back home, car detailing. Been doing that for 2 years. I absolutely love everything that has to do with entrepreneurship. So glad to be with you today. And I live in San Diego.
My name's Thomas. I'm from Boston, Mass. I'm on the wrestling team here at Case. I'm a freshman, interested in business. Probably gonna study business management at Weatherhead and maybe consider some other options. Definitely minor in entrepreneurship, and so excited to learn more about this year's ThinkBox, entrepreneurship programs, and get to know everyone here. And all right, awesome.
Tom Shaver, I'm a doctoral student at Case Western. I work for a big engineering company. We sell robots and all kinds of stuff, but on the side, I'm an entrepreneur, and my newest product is Yoroki, which is a vitality drink. It's a multifunctional drink that's available on Amazon right now. So I'm here to hang out, to learn, and hopefully get some ideas if anybody's interested in the food and beverage innovation. So glad to be here.
Hello everyone, I'm Parvita. I'm originally from Iran. I'm an international student here. I'm freshman. I'm majoring in chemical engineering, and I'm really into entrepreneurship, so it's fine.
Hi, I'm Kathleen. I study mechanical and aerospace engineering. I run the rocket team here. I spent a lot of time studying on this floor, and Michael said, "Hey, this would be a way to broaden your horizon." I was like, "Right, I don't know anything about this stuff."
We'll get to you. We'll skip you, Matt.
Hey, I'm Matt Lehman. I live in Cleveland. I work for a software company in the day, and at night I have a mobile app company that focuses on soccer. It's called Football News 365. So if you're a Premier League fan or MLS or NWSL, come see me. I also happen to spend a lot of time on the tennis court with Mr. Goldberg over there. He likes to lob, I'll just put it that way.
Well, I was supposed to ask how's it going on the court with him?
We're actually after tomorrow morning. We're playing each other. But no, this is a great program. I know Michael does an amazing job. In particular, because it's a Friday afternoon and it's sunny out, and you guys are here. Kudos to you.
Awesome, thanks. We have a few more. Is it done?
Yeah.
Introduce.
My name is Dan. I'm a first year graduate mathematics student. I'm glad to be here.
From
Israel.
Right. Jack.
My name's Jack Michael. I'm a senior mechanical engineer, minor in entrepreneurship, so.
Okay.
I'm Gabriel. I'm from the Chicago area. I'm a first year here studying biomedical engineering and computer science. And I'm interested in getting into the more technical side of startups in that world.
Stacey.
I'm Stacey Lotz. I work with the Veale Institute, and I get to manage a lot of the student programming.
Hi, my name's Britton. I'm the program manager for LaunchNet, and I help do the background logistics for this event. Before I end my introduction, I do ask that everyone check in today. We're trying to do a little bit better with check-ins so that we know, as good entrepreneurs, we do our customer discovery and see how you guys are enjoying and attendance and all that great stuff so that we can provide more of these in the future. So thank you.
And Katie, I see you online if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Katie. I'm a sophomore studying finance and history. I'm excited to hear from you guys today.
Thanks, Katie. Great, so we'll kick it off formally. I know we're expecting a few more people, including a couple of Glickmans that'll be making their way here.
Yeah, by tracking them, it doesn't look like they're close.
It's
So
all
good.
good. It's all good. They're welcome whenever. So I'm Michael Goldberg. I'm our executive director for the Veale Institute, and thrilled to be back on campus with students and kicking off the semester. Great to see some old faces and old friends and meet new people as well. And greetings to everybody on Zoom. We also stream on LinkedIn, so welcome if you're joining us that way. These are very interactive. We always have student moderators. Fausta, I'll turn it over to you in a second, is going to moderate. For those that are sort of new to our community, we'd love to have you. I think Tedros, you moderated a session last year in the spring. Did you do one?
No, I joined them, but I was.
You came a lot.
Okay, came a lot, obviously. So anyway, we're looking for student volunteers to moderate future sessions. And we'll open up to questions. Fausta will sort of spend the first half hour kind of leading the questions, and we'll open it up. And if you're on Zoom, just ping me, I'm on. If you have a question, and I'll make sure Fausta knows, or if you're on LinkedIn, just put the question in the comments is how we grab them. So Matt, thank you for welcome back to Cleveland. I guess it's your second time we've had you in our speaker series. I think the first time was super early on, maybe even during.
I think there was an upstairs, it was like downstairs, like we're adding floors like crazy.
Moving on up to the big time now. But it's great to have you back in Cleveland. And as I mentioned, we also have student moderators, and Fausta, who's an incoming member of our Veale Snyder Fellowship. I'll let her introduce herself, is going to lead things. So with that, over to you, Fausta.
Hi everyone, my name is Fausta. I'm like a junior and a half. I'm a neuroscience major. As Michael mentioned, I'm the incoming Veale Snyder Fellow. I'm really interested in the interdisciplinary nature of neuroscience, and so I've been getting more involved with entrepreneurship over the last year or so. And yeah, I've been getting involved with startups, stuff like that, so that's why I'm here. Okay, so with that, let's start us off. So could we just start off by you telling us a bit more about yourself and your work?
Sure. So yeah, Matt Glickman, thank you all for coming. As said, on a nice Friday afternoon. I'm in Silicon Valley where it's sunny like this all the time. So, but I grew up here. So I'm from Cleveland originally. I sort of migrated east, went to college in New England, went into consulting in Boston, and then worked at a educational nonprofit, Teach for America. Ironically, that was my introduction to entrepreneurship, but it was so early it wasn't called that. It was it was this second, 1-year-old nonprofit organization. I went out to Stanford for business school and master's in education, and after that joined what was then a very small software company called Intuit. It's now a big one, and then did what probably why I'm here is I became an entrepreneur, and I started and grew 2 companies. The first was a consumer internet company in the early days of the internet, which is actually kind of following the way AI is working, where it's like all this excitement, and then people are like, oh, it's not going to go anywhere. Like people are saying about it, not everyone, but some people about AI. But Baby Center was the kind of, and still is, like the destination site on the internet for information on pregnancy and parenting. Come back to a bit of how 2 guys without kids could start that. And then I built a very different kind of company. It was an enterprise software company, an analytics software company. We made performance management software that helped measure, manage, and improve the performance of large customer operations, mostly call centers, but also sales groups and other groups for very large banks, insurance companies, and the like. And after 20 years of kind of entrepreneur operator, because I built those to pretty good size, for starting from nothing, they got to be big, kind of, probably generated about $100 million of sales collectively, 500 employees, about $1 billion of enterprise value. And then I moved into the phase now that I call supporting entrepreneurs. So I started a nonprofit to support social entrepreneurs in early childhood education and development, which went back to my baby center roots, that early years really matter. And in the US in particular, but even around the world, we tend to focus on helping kids once they get to kindergarten, but really a lot happens in the early years. So I was supporting that under-supported, under-resourced area. I started teaching entrepreneurship at Stanford Business School. I teach the flagship entrepreneurship class, which has now grown to like 5 different sections. And we teach entrepreneurial tenets, not just to start a company as much to apply it if you're in a big company or government or a nonprofit. And then I do a little bit of company advising and investing.
Yeah, sounds cool. So, okay, so let's start by talking about your experience at Stanford and your work there. So you lead the startup garage and your work focuses a lot on combining the principles of design thinking and also lean startup. So,
Not just to start a company as much.
Oh boy, there we go. There's always someone. I was trying to get to LinkedIn. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
yeah, so you focus a lot on design thinking and lean startup. So could you talk about what those approaches are first, and then also how does this mindset, how can it be useful for young professionals, both who might want to start a business, but also just in general, if they are looking to drive innovation in existing companies?
Yeah, okay, good, yeah. So yeah, basically, if you had to simplify what we teach, is design thinking and lean startup. And I'm not a big like buzzword, I've now been around long enough. Every 5 years, some management guru writes a book about excellence in this and then not excellence in this, and and they're but I actually think like design thinking and lean startup are simple concepts, but they're pretty powerful. They're both sort of about action and iteration. But the design thinking is the first part, and I mentioned how did like 2 guys without kids, start the leading pregnancy and parenting site on the internet. Design thinking is all about how you understand customers and problems before you come up with solutions. And that sounds very basic, that you should focus on customers and that you should focus on their problems, but somehow it's counterintuitive. And it's actually more like groups like this and at Stanford, the more educated people are, the more they're like, oh, I'm gonna do a spreadsheet, I'm gonna write something, I'm gonna study, I'm gonna think. And the less they sort of exercise that muscle of getting out there and really understanding. And so what design thinking is about is just getting close to a customer in a kind of not structured like formal way, but just being like an anthropologist, an ethnographer almost, and really understanding what drives them and what their needs are. And so we teach a whole bunch of kind of questioning techniques that again are counterintuitive. So humans have a tendency to want to sell or to want to push, the bias that they have for a particular solution. And the whole way to summarize it is, I think, we teach people to love the problem and not the solution. So really make sure you're focusing on like what do people really need, and then we'll figure out how to solve it. So it helped, for instance, with Baby Center that we didn't have kids, we weren't women, so we were actually able to bring what we call like the beginner's mindset to it and just question everything. And the core insight we came up with was that the needs change weekly almost, so that someone who's 26 weeks pregnant just doesn't even relate to someone who's 30 weeks pregnant. They look different, they feel different, they have different issues. And so we built the first weekly personalized, education site on the internet, and things took off from there. So that's just kind of a flavor of design thinking. And then lean startup is just the continuation of that, which is all around attaching yourself to a specific customer, their problem, and treating everything like a hypothesis. The thing people don't understand about startups is they're a hypothesis testing machine more than anything. So it's really the concept of how can we learn the most quickly and assume most of what we are, planning is not right. So it's everything from what customer are we serving, what channel we're using to get to the customer, what solution is it, how are we pricing, all of those things can be tests. And so the idea is the more quickly you can generate tests to learn, the more quickly you can, the more cycles you have to try to find the winning solution. I can do a little test here. Let's try this. We'll see. Let's see if it doesn't work. I'll be like, okay, that was a failure, and we'll move on. So if you are McDonald's, and let's say you decide you want to think about maybe we should go into having like Italian food, like spaghetti on the on our menu because it's really popular. How would you go about adding spaghetti and Italian food to McDonald's if you were a McDonald's executive? As I mentioned, you can be entrepreneurial inside big companies. Anyone, let's just get ideas out there quickly. What would you do? Yeah.
Start testing the product out, make sure you can actually make a good meal for the customer.
Right. So in the old days, right, people would probably build out the whole thing, create something, you know, and then get it out there, and it's super expensive, takes a long time, and they're like, oh, that's the wrong approach. So you're saying break it down into a test, yeah.
Send out surveys.
Okay, so what's the difference between your two ideas?
Guess you're getting, you know, actual customer reactions.
And
To
you're-
see if it's even a possible idea.
Right, so you've broken it down even further, right? So obviously yours isn't gonna be as accurate, right? But it's much quicker, so, you know, you've actually just learned that. What is, what's the problem with surveys? Or a problem with surveys?
Not accurate.
Yeah, why?
I don't know, maybe some people can do it multiple times just to screw up the results or something.
Yeah,
What people think they want is often not what they actually want. Plus, there's several inherent statistical biases with surveys such as sampling, things like that.
Right.
So.
yeah, and the, and that's the, yeah, we kind of summarize that as like, you know, what people say and what they do is really different, but you can get something from it. And you can anyone, let's try to break it down. Can you even, how can you learn even more quickly? Yeah, yeah.
I was just trying to answer the
Yeah.
prior question.
Uh-huh.
The first thing I would cover is how does serving pasta fit with the brand model of McDonald's? Because as it currently stands, McDonald's is viewed as a fast food restaurant, and
Mhm.
pasta is seen as a dine-in food.
Right.
So how does that fit the customer base that is trying to get fast food services, but we're trying to come from a new approach, so I'd check how is that basically.
Right, and so I'm not gonna say that's wrong, because it's not at all wrong, but this is actually more the difference between like the typical corporate strategy approach would and should start that way. Should we even go into this? Does that make sense? And there's a bunch of reasons why you may or may not want to do that. What happens is most people historically then apply that to, okay, let's say the strategy people do that and say, no, there is actually like, this is the future. Then the question is, people usually take that approach, let's study, let's build. So the, you know, entrepreneurial concept is how can you learn more quickly? Also, we can get back on script here. I'll say that one of the fastest ways you can learn, cheapest, and actually shows action is, which we probably would get to eventually if we keep pushing with this exercise, is put spaghetti on the menu, right? Because if you have it up there and you see who orders it, you don't even have to have it, right? Because you can just say, oh, it's out of stock, we don't have it. But, you know, all of a sudden we took something that was like usually years in the making to your idea was probably 6 months or 9 months. We, you know, with survey, we were down to like 1 month. And literally you could go in and, you know, paste that up there. And if no one ever asks for it, they're probably not ever gonna do it. Now, there's other ways you can do it. You can reinforce with brands. So anyway, that's an example of like, it's counterintuitive, but you can learn quite quickly. And people, you don't wanna do anything unethical, but we always get, this thing is out of stock, you know? So I'm sure, I don't know if you tried that with your drinks, right? If you wanted to go into line extensions, right? You put it out there and you see if people click on it or ask questions or fill out, you know, and if they don't, then maybe you need to change the messaging or the product or whatever, but you didn't put a lot of time into building it. So anyway, that's an idea of how you can like sort of be more quick and cheap and fast in the tests that you do. And that's, you know, those are the kind of experiments that Lean Startup was based on. Okay, sorry, long way of answering the combination of design thinking and Lean Startup.
Yeah, you kind of touched on this a little bit in your introduction, but I feel like at least in my experience, a lot of the times when I tell students like, oh, you know, I'm interested in entrepreneurship, their first reaction is kind of like, oh, I don't want to start a business. So from your experience, and how do you view entrepreneurship as like a tool for learning and discovery? And what do you think is the value of engaging with it, even maybe if the goal isn't to start a company?
Right. Yeah, a couple things. First of all, now entrepreneurship is more popular everywhere. And what I say is it's not for everyone. It's really hard. The highs are high, but the lows are low. So so don't feel like you have to do it because that's in the zeitgeist, because it's really not for everyone. Let's say you choose not to do it. I do feel like everyone can be more entrepreneurial in what they do. And so I think it's this idea of bringing this mindset of like, think about the customer, think about iterations. And another way people define startups is you are commanding resources that aren't at your disposal. So if you just figure out how I can test something. So if you're in a nonprofit or you're in government or you're in a big company, you know, like McDonald's, you can figure out how do I do this without, you know, having the right structure. And I just think it's, I mean, it's essentially, well, it's a very interesting thing being here from Cleveland. I know you've done work on this. Cleveland was entrepreneurial in like, I don't know what, like 1880 to probably 1950. And right, entrepreneurship drives energy, it drives, you know, creativity, it drives productivity, and like led to a lot of good things. And then what happens is places tend to get successful, and then they put up, they add barriers to just protect. And then, you know, Cleveland is not as vibrant as it used to be, and this isn't just Cleveland, many of you come from other parts of the world, some that are more entrepreneurial by nature, some that aren't. So I tend to think entrepreneurship has a place in terms of bringing that vitality that improves the living standards for everyone, and it just brings energy and excitement. So what I'd encourage you to do is, like, even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, that's great, but try to be entrepreneurial in something, you know, that you do somewhere.
Yeah, okay, that's really good advice. I think you mentioned this a little bit, but I feel like Baby Center is definitely a fascinating case study of, you know, those exact concepts that you are at the core of your teaching. So could you touch a little bit on how did you even come up with this idea when, as you said, you co-founded a company that's so focused on being a parent and being a mother, and, you know,
Yeah.
neither of you were parents.
Well, first, now I'll do the flip side of, like, I didn't ever think I'd be an entrepreneur, because back 30 years ago, which it was a much smaller part of the world, and you tended to think of entrepreneurship as this kind of crazy, risky, you know, thing. And I was like, oh, I'd been a consultant, you know, I was kind of more analytical. I thought I'd be an executive. And then one of the things I learned that's, I think, now more popular is you can train yourself if you want to be entrepreneurial and find opportunities. So it really is just finding out things that aren't working in the world. And like my wife, who's, hopefully she's not listening to this, and who's a lawyer, is sort of like, you know, she's actually entrepreneurial, but every idea, she's like, well, if it was a good idea, it would have already been done. And all you have to do is just look at anything you've used in the last 5 years that's new, and you're like, in hindsight, you're like, that's a great idea, but it didn't exist. So there are always places in the world that you can improve what we eat, what we drink, where we go, how we find information, how we do everything. And, you know, just training yourself to, again, expand your mind, like kids have that, you know, why not, why doesn't this exist, is, I think, a good way to find that. And that's essentially how I did it. I realized I wanted to start something, and I think this is a good way, like we talked earlier about some of the people here earlier, how networking is really valuable. I got myself into a good company where there were good people and good information, and I just started, you know, thinking like, what are problems that I can solve? And the internet was pretty new then, and the head of the company was had been at Procter & Gamble at consumer marketing. And a lot of entrepreneurship is bringing an idea from one field to another. And he's like, you know, a lot of marketing is about finding people when they've gone through a life event change, because their minds are open to new things. Some of you are new here as new students, right? You're like, I don't know this city, I don't know this country. You know, you need to find out everything, like, you know, how do I get information? Same thing happens graduating, you know, high school, college, getting married, you know, getting your first job. So anyway, I was just thinking, well, that company was financial services, so we looked at buying a home with a mortgage and all that, and just the financial implications. But I started thinking through it, and I was like, what are other life events? And you know, I was married but didn't have kids, and I was like, wow, I know nothing about having that. So it was really that simple idea. And then we applied it in research to sort of say, is there a business here? And, you know, found out that there was. The other part I'll say is, like, how the startup world has evolved more. This whole concept of design thinking and lean startup, they didn't exist as concepts, but when I was asked to teach the class, because I didn't create the core class, I changed it. I was like, oh, this is the things I did, and I didn't know they existed. And some of it is with a startup, it is being constrained is really helpful. You think of it as just, well, we don't have as much money, so we're, you know, that's just a constraint we have to live with. But it is actually, being constrained allows you to focus, and being constrained and relentless allows you to break through. So most breakthroughs happen because they're constrained. And you see this a lot of, like, the well-funded startups out there that raise lots of money. They end up failing because they don't have the constraints. They can hire too many people, and they kind of miss that period to get the core insight that is really creative and breakthrough. So a lot of, again, back to the startups being counterintuitive, is, you know, that the constraints is a counterintuitive one, but you actually benefit from it. You have to work hard and sleep less and do some things like that, but it allows you to get these creative breakthroughs.
Yeah. Your transition from Baby Center, which is kind of, you know, like consumer internet, to Immerse Systems, which is analytics software, that's quite a significant pivot. What motivated that move, and also how did your experience from Baby Center influence it?
Yeah. So I think, you know, as I said, everyone, like entrepreneurship, and I'd say in general with life, for you who are young, is like, be reflective on who you are and what drives you. And I was one, I'm a curious person. I like doing lots of different things. So some people are just like, I only like this kind of, you know, business. I only like consumer products, or I only like business, or I only like things that are tech or non-tech. I just happen to be a little bit more eclectic. I did love technology, so I've tended to focus there. But after doing a consumer startup, not because I wanted to do a consumer startup, but because I came up with that idea. The company was successful, but we ended up selling it and, wanted to do another company. And we just looked around, which is a little bit of an unusual way to do things, but it can be. We went through a structured process of, what could we start or buy? At that point, we were actually looking into buying companies and then being entrepreneurial with it, like I said. And it wasn't like we said we were not going to do consumer, but we just happened on a different problem. And it was a application that helped people perform better. So it kind of resonated with stuff that I was good at. And we just followed it. And I, again, used the process that I now teach, which is, we don't know anything about this area. Let's go network. And we started with call centers. We found people who had call centers and we said, how do you manage your people? And they don't really have anything, and all of the software, which I think Matt is in, is all around how do we, get a 360-degree view of the customer. And a lot of entrepreneurship is bringing kind of a non-obvious or contrarian insight that later proves to be true. And we said, well, someone should be looking at the people who are there, and we created a 360-degree view of the people. And I had friends who were like, "Why? That sounds boring. You were a consumer guy, and now you're doing that." And I like analytical problems. I don't love selling to companies. That was the negative part because it takes a long time. But I love building the company there, and so it's very different. And to this day, I do work that spans education, health, marketing services. But I don't do things. I don't tend to do a lot in security or deep tech or things like that are outside my interest or expertise.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, even though you've been involved in tech quite heavily, that education has stayed so central to your career throughout the whole time. So could you tell us a bit more about Promise Venture Studio and how it supports social entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I've always done a mixture of private sector work and sort of community or public sector work. Like I mentioned, I was at an educational nonprofit, early in my career. And I just, when I was doing Baby Center, I got really fascinated by the brain research of how in the early years, year for year, you sort of develop more than you do in even when you're in the kindergarten through 12 system. And I remember thinking at the time, the people on the internet tend to be people who are more educated, they have resources and choices. And I was like, what about the people who aren't there? People who don't have those resources and choices. And I was too busy at the time. I had young kids, I had a startup, but I said, at some point, that's a cause I want to come back to. And I was fortunate, I was successful. I didn't have to get a paycheck right away or maybe ever. And I had time and connection. So I just said, I want to make a difference in this world. And I didn't set out to start something. I really set out to say, how can I help connect or do something or bring spotlight on this field? And one thing led to another, and there are a bunch of philanthropists, and they're like, there's just not a lot of support for the early years, and you have the right skill set, and you can probably assemble a team that can help coach and connect, sort of social entrepreneurs in this area. And so I would, started off my third or fourth venture, depending how you do that, to create eventually a nonprofit that created kind of like what ThinkBox is here, like the sort of hub, like the infrastructure that nurtured people coming together, connecting talent, capital, and ideas to help build new things.
And I feel like that's a great example of, how you can also use entrepreneurship as a tool for systemic change. So that's very inspiring. And you mentioned this a little bit before, but you've had a diverse career. So you worked in tech, you worked in education, social impact. So how did you manage these transitions? And also, what advice would you have for students who might not be following a very linear path and are kind of trying to figure out how to combine multiple of their interests?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say first it comes down to what you are. Some people are, I consider myself a little bit more of a generalist where I've done a lot of stuff, although in the field of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and technology. Some people have a passion about something really deep, like I want to build rockets or I want to do that. Both are equally good paths. So the first step is just reflect on what is most important to you. And I think I might even printed it out. There is this framework. Who's heard of Ikigai? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. It's the Japanese. Yeah. Can you
And it's sort of like you have I think it's 5 different parts of yourself where you look into the different parts of your life and what you enjoy, what you think is interesting, what you actually like doing, and what you would pursue as a job, and then combine them into one thing. And that's I didn't read the book, but
you got the main concepts. I had to keep look at my notes. So yeah, first of all, it's a Japanese concept, Ikigai, Ikigai. And from my understanding is like with a lot of these things, it's actually not that popular in Japan. It's sort of like a no. It's become very big here, but yeah, I mean, the one I have is it's like the combination of, you know, it's essentially like they always say follow your passions, and I think that advice on its own is usually not enough. It's like, what are you excited about? What do you like? What are you good at? Which sometimes overlaps. And then also, what does society value? And you know, if you can find the intersection of those or the best intersection, that gives you the most sustainability because you have a way of like, you know, if it's just your passion, you know, that can be good, but that might be a hobby and you can't sustain yourself doing it. If it's just something that's like, I can go and make a lot of money doing it, but you don't like it or you're not particularly good at it, you won't be successful. So I think there's, you know, one piece of that is kind of find out what motivates you. And then the second is, there's even a book called Designing Your Life, which I think there's free worksheets of it. It's the same design thinking concept I say to your life. Like most people, in hindsight, my life looks like it makes sense of like this in education. But it's not like you, even at my age, if I ask Michael what he's gonna do when he grow up, he'll probably get to see his eyebrows. It's like we all get stressed. You don't know where the future is gonna go. So it's sort of reflect on yourself enough to know what motivates you and then don't get overly stuck into that. Because what you're gonna do is that'll point you in a direction and then serendipity takes over and you follow it, you meet someone, you find something interesting. And you also find things you don't like, which is fine. Like, I don't like this or that kind of work. And usually that's how careers unfold. So mine has kind of moved in that direction of liking entrepreneurial, social entrepreneurial, you know, support. And it's based on those combinations of what I like to do, what I'm good at. And yeah, people seem to value.
Okay, so one last question from me before we open the discussion to the rest of the audience. Were there any skills that now, you know, in hindsight, you can see that were very useful and you really needed them, but you did not know that you need them when you just started in your career? And if so, do you have recommendations on how to develop them?
That is a great question. Let me try and boil it down. I think the most important thing is to always be learning and be curious. Like if you look at most successful people, and I don't mean success just like their prestige wise. I mean, if like people who, you know, seem to accomplish a lot, it's just, they tend to always be a learning machine. They read a lot, they, you know, absorb however you know, they get it from podcasts or people or talking. So I think just that core innate curiosity is probably the most foundational skill. Related to that, I'd say like it is good wherever you are in school. Like I see people getting more almost like transactional in focus, like I'm not gonna get much out of this class, or I tried this and it doesn't seem interesting. Like you need a combination of hard and soft skills. So a lot of people at business school at Stanford, for instance, it's very focused on like kind of more leadership and interpersonal stuff, which I'll come back to are very important. People tend to downplay the finance skills and things like that, but you know what, it's helpful to learn those things. So I think it's just like, make sure you cover enough of the bases that you can learn in any environment. You can learn from a bad boss, you can learn someone in a bad, you know, class. So do what you can learning. And then the last is where I was getting is I do think life is about, you know, relationships and people. And so like figuring out how to be adaptable, how to be helpful to people, how to relate to people and understand them is what's, you know, and there are skills you can learn and how to do that and how to practice that are what ultimately allow you to have more success and also I think feel better about yourself.
Yeah, well, now we can open the discussion to the rest of the room. So if you have a question, feel free to ask.
Yes.
Okay, so earlier you talked about how when you made your exit, you were looking into buying companies alongside making your own other startup. What do you think about like the current avenue of like investing into companies that already exist and, you know, at scaling them into a greater extent through like, I don't know, like current things like that are increasing productivity like AI, software, automation, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I have done more, but not exclusively like kind of from start entrepreneurship. But there actually, and it came out of Stanford too, there's a whole group there that created the concept of what they called search funds, where you like basically get sponsored by someone to go out and try to find companies to buy, and they would argue that's actually like a great path to success. I mean, they each have their pros and cons. I'd say the advantage of that is you're starting with something and you can take it somewhere. The disadvantage is it's always harder to change things. So we ended up not buying some companies because changing cultures and work processes are hard. But like with anything, it's all about like, doing the analysis and picking the right opportunity and making it happen. And right now with AI, there is a big trend of a lot of the venture investors who used to do pure startups are saying, wait, we might be better off buying like accounting firms and insurance brokers and things that in the past they would say those aren't good things to buy because you can't really scale them. They're existing businesses or they're very people intensive and they're not, necessarily going to scale. They're saying, wait, this is actually how with AI, if we own them, we can actually like really get deep into the workflow and figure out how to change it. So it's too early to know, but there are a whole bunch of people saying that's a good approach. And what I'd say is I think the main constraint is it's going to require change. So you have to make sure if you do that, you find the right kind of company or opportunity where there's enough to learn from, but not so much that you can't fundamentally change the who, what, and how they operate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, where do you think your entrepreneurial spirit kind of came from? You were born with it or you developed it, or how'd you kind of get into all this?
Yeah, I think like I alluded to it, I don't think it was, obviously I guess I had it in that I'm curious and fast paced and all that stuff, but I really didn't think I was an entrepreneur. So it was really just by getting exposed. I think I was fortunate to be at Stanford at a time when entrepreneurship was starting. And then I got into it. And I think some people get into it and they're like, I see this for my students. They're like, that's not what what's right for me. So I think it was the same way I described the career stuff. Like it seemed interesting to me. It seemed to fit. I do remember thinking like, I wasn't a workaholic, but I like to work. I recharge quickly. So I was like, well, I'm my own boss, that'll work better. I can, just like I can put more into it. People do that in a career though. If I were, if I was more wired to work in a big company, like putting in the extra effort makes sense. But I think I just didn't like politics. I didn't like bigger organizations. So I think I just was wired to do small stuff. And then serendipity was like, oh, that's entrepreneurship. And then I kind of, as I mentioned outside, I didn't have the ideas. I realized like, oh, I can develop that. So I think you can be trained to do it. And then with that same thing though, don't force yourself to do it if you, are going in that direction. You're like, this just isn't for me. It's too, chaotic or too, undefined. Did you have your hand up? No. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So I just had a quick question, to bring up like the characteristics of an entrepreneur. I know we alluded to it a bit. But I wanted to kind of change the subject and ask, to give you a person in my mind is Ray Kroc, who stole,
Oh, right, yeah.
the two brothers' idea, created their own, or created McDonald's. But I wanted to ask, how much of an entrepreneur is built up of stealing other people's ideas?
Well, yeah, I don't know. There's a movie on it. Did you watch the movie? And the thing with movies you have to be careful of is like how it's usually not 100% truthful. So the very interesting story, and I've heard that as a good example. It fits a little bit into what you were talking about. Of he built up like a McDonald's existed, and he took it and built it. I'm not going to make a judgment on how much of that was stealing versus not. I mean, there's probably some of that, but I think there are plenty of cases. I'll actually use an example. Starbucks was there's a coffee chain called Pete's was bigger than Starbucks at the time. Starbucks was a one chain thing, and this guy Howard Schultz came along and was like, I like this concept, it's pretty similar, and I'm gonna scale it. So I think the stealing is not okay, but the idea, I think this is often what people mistake about entrepreneurship, especially scaling entrepreneurship, whether you start something or grow it, is that all the soft mushiness of like creating processes and how to scale and how to build the right product and do all that stuff. Ray Kroc did that, not the people he got it from. And a lot of people, there's an example actually a physicist developed that I use a little bit with entrepreneurship, a little joke that's probably, maybe Michael will laugh at it, but it'll be too, we'll see if I can get the rest of you to laugh at it. It's basically a rabbit shows up at Hoover Dam. You guys know what Hoover Dam is? It's like huge dam. And there's a beaver standing next to him. And the rabbit looks over and said, like, did you make this? And the beaver looks at him and said, no, but it's based on a design of mine. So, basically like doing something small scale, like have a restaurant, is not the same thing as building up McDonald's. So whether he stole the initial idea or not, the other part was all him and being entrepreneurial and figuring out all the steps. And I'm sure he went through a lot of what we talked about of like, who's the real customer? What experiments do I need to do to go from one restaurant to 5 to 50 to, getting into more food, maybe not spaghetti, but other things.
I'm actually gonna jump in real fast. We don't often get LinkedIn comment
Oh, yeah.
question, so I want to make sure we get to this. One of our alumni asked, how do you balance addressing a social need with creating a financially sustainable model?
Yeah, great question, and thank you for bringing it in online.
Yeah.
It's often, talk about the structural disadvantages. I think it's a tough problem, and I think a lot of entrepreneurship is, I mean, even if you, just in a pure business, I think one of the hard things about building successful companies is you have to do something that's desirable, feasible and sustainable. So even just in a for-profit context, it's difficult to put all of those together. And I think we can think of tons of ideas that should exist as businesses that don't, everywhere, right? And you're just like, well, that's just too hard to get people to use it, or it's too expensive to find the customer. So I think the same thing applies in a social sense. You just need to look for that overlapping of like, who is this useful to, and how can we, if the direct consumer isn't going to pay, how can we get other people in society to pay? And so one of the things I worked a lot on, and this model hasn't fully worked, is a lot of philanthropy funds a lot of social innovation work. And a lot of times people talk about philanthropy as like the venture capital of social services. So they're willing to take chances, invest in more. So it's sort of that like venture capital allows you to test and develop something. And then if you're successful, you can find government programs to scale it up. Now, the reality is that's hard. Like the government's not in a phase where it's trying new things. Philanthropy is tapped out, but there are ways to do it. So I think the best is you just have to apply a lot of these same concepts. And that's where I like applying them of like, who can we find that will help fund a social cause? Like who's the other stakeholder that could be out there? And it could be, could be a university, it could be a city, it could be a state or whatever. But it's tough, but an admirable problem, and one I'm glad to see that someone's trying to tackle. So. Yeah, make sure any others.
I have one question.
Okay, yeah.
I was gonna ask, I remember the story, one of my friend's father is a CEO of a Christmas tree company. And I asked him, how does it feel to be a CEO of a Christmas tree company? And he said, I don't care if I'm selling Christmas trees or plates. So I was thinking, do you think to be an entrepreneur, you don't care that much about what are you doing? It's more like the creating things and just being entrepreneurial in a sense, because I always thought of entrepreneurship as, you focus on something, you develop it and you do something in that path. But, I'm hearing from you, and like the more I meet people, is that it's not as linear.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to what you like. There will be some people who would be like, I love Christmas trees. I want to sell Christmas trees. It's fun. I get into the holiday thing. I like the blend of whatever it's like, it's trees and being in nature and would not want to sell plates. Other people, like he's motivated by something else, like building a company or making money or whatever. So I think that's a personal decision about what you can do. I see that all the time in my students, because a lot of, like we talked about the testing, one of the most common pivots that we see is people often start on I'm gonna sell this to consumers. This is actually similar to the social impact problem we just talked about. And then you're like, oh, the consumers won't buy, who else can buy or fund this? And so they say, oh, well, maybe a company will do it. So like let's say I want to provide a mental health service. Oh, someone's not gonna pay. Oh, wait, but companies might pay because it'll make their employees, more productive. And then, but then all of a sudden, then you're not selling to consumers, you're selling to businesses, and they're like, I don't want to do that. I don't find that as interesting. I love consumer problems. I love marketing. And then, I don't tell them, no, there's a good business. You have to go do that. It's like, that's a personal choice. So I think that's ultimately one of the choices you have to make of what motivates you and what interests me. Like, as I said, I build businesses in different areas because I like different kinds of products. I like building organizations and building teams, so I can do multiple things like that. But but there are things that I don't find interesting, so I don't do.
So quick,
Yeah.
So there's a ton of tools out there now with AI that allow you to kind of accelerate the early part of the entrepreneurs, right? Like deep research, you can create like a virtual advisory board.
Yeah.
How do you counsel your students on using those versus there's value in like doing the work, there's value in actually doing the research. So how do you suggest people like think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I teach other classes, including an undergraduate class and another graduate class that are entrepreneurship classes. And it's tough. Those of us who are a little bit older are in a position where we learn the core skills of like how to read and write and all of that stuff. And for your generation and even people behind you, like there are ways to use them as crutches. So I do worry that if you don't figure out how to box yourself into like learning the core skills, you know, and which just take hard practice, like you're never gonna get anywhere, so I would encourage people to treat, you know, AI is gonna be like smart, like phones, they're an addiction, I have mine right here, you know, so how you limit that addiction. On the other hand, I also think they're not going away, like humans have built technology into themselves, so I don't think AI is going away. So what I'd say is don't let it replace your thinking, but let it augment your thinking. And actually, innovation is one of the core areas. And as an example, we're always changing our class because we're entrepreneurial. And this last spring, we basically run people through a 6-week process to figure out, you come in with an idea. We don't care if you're going to develop it as a business, just a way to test and learn. What's your idea? All the stuff I shared, like, how, you know, go out, who are you going to interview? How are you going to interview? Practice interviewing skills, come up with some problems, brainstorm some solutions, create a quick prototype. It can even be on paper to test. That process takes for graduate students 6 weeks. And these are motivated students who think they want to start a company. Now, granted, they have other classes, but it's like, this is coming at us too fast. We then, this last year, said, all right, let's do an AI-driven version of that. And literally in 90 minutes, we went through all of those steps. Now, what happened is when you look at the other end, it's not like people are like, I'm off to the races. The good thing about it is they looked at it and they're like, well, this isn't exactly what I would do. This doesn't quite, I get, it's clever how far AI got, but it's sort of like missing a step, or I'm not sure this is the right customer. But by going through that process really quickly, it, you know, it sped things up because now they knew, now it's, you know, they were much more viscerally attached, like, oh, now I get why I have to interview and what I do. And I think you apply that across the board, like using AI as a smart additional teammate is really helpful. Like channels is another thing later, like once you start having an idea for a product, not even a product, you have to think about how do I take this to market? And, you know, most of my students, even though they're business school students, don't really understand, like, what is a channel? Like, what do I sell direct or through a partner? Or would I use a, you know, telephone sales force or a field sales force who drives around? And, you know, asking those questions, like, help me, you know, develop a channel, like it expands your mind really quickly. So I'd say learn to use it not as a crutch, but as an additional teammate. And this is one of those areas where it can be really helpful because entrepreneurship is, and there are other fields too, where it's a lot about, I want to cover a lot of different terrain very broadly, and AI can be super, super helpful.
I mean, you alluded to Cleveland's rich entrepreneurial history and kind of some of the things that happened that over time. It's like Elvis and I were in class yesterday. We actually had a little class discussion about what does Silicon Valley have that the rest of the world wants, whether it's in Cleveland or other parts of the world. I mean, as you come back home and spend time here, and I know, I mean, obviously you're not the only Clevelander that sort of grew up here and sort of launched a place like San Francisco. What advice do you have like for your hometown about, because I think it's a struggle. I mean, San Francisco has the money and the people and the talent, and a place like Cleveland that has some of that, and actually we're blessed that a lot of these people are here at least for 4 years of time. But I think many of us are still struggling with sort of how do we get the mojo back here.
Right. Well, and I think if you do work in this area, what I'd say is what's different is, because I moved to Silicon Valley in 1991, and for a very long time, probably up till 10 years ago, it was really just Silicon Valley that was entrepreneurial and nowhere else in the world. But over the last 15 years, there are plenty of entrepreneurial, you know, if you go to New York, there's entrepreneurial community. If you go to Berlin, London, other places, and sometimes they go up and down, but they're definitely, you know, I think there are places you can go and find a lot of that self-replicating energy where there's, you know, people who know what's going on and all of that stuff. And it's kind of spread to almost every city. And you see it in every industry. It used to not exist, but now, you know, it's all around where the talent capital ideas have concentration. So my advice to Cleveland, and I know you talked about this, Cleveland looks like lots of other parts of the world, and some of you come from those parts. I think it's more about focus and playing to your strengths. So like Cleveland has a lot of material science and the like, and that's an area that's changing a lot. So I think it's a combination of, I think you need some sort of like government, private stuff to try. It's always tough to industrial engineer, so it's not like you can fully do that. But I think if you figure out how to leverage the strengths of an area, and, you know, Cleveland has a couple of those, and just try to, you know, invest in that and think about it as talent capital ideas. Like that's what Promise did in early childhood, right? We didn't do it in a physical location. It wasn't a, you know, a city, but it was like, well, this exists. K-12 education has a social entrepreneurial ecosystem. Digital health has it. You know, alternative energy has it. So let's figure out a way to get people to share. I mean, like this is an example of that, to like share ideas. And so I think you build on this and then you find people starting things and growing things and you get the money there. And I think once it's that the getting the motor going is the hard part, but once you get it going, it can be successful. So and then the last thing I'd say is there is which probably universities help with, like a cultural mindset overlay. So I think this group is vastly overrepresented, like really working on interesting things, thinking about the future in new open ways. And if you went outside, there'd be a lot of people who were just like, this is the way we do things, this is the way we've always done things, and you gotta fight against that group. It's not just Cleveland, I summarize it because I lived a lot on the East Coast too. I literally, and in social impact with like philanthropists in startups, like I always say the simplest way I can describe the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast is like on the East Coast, they ask why, and on the West Coast, they ask why not. And yeah, that's that little change helps.
I've got another Zoom question. Maybe this could be the last question before Professor rips out. It's from Salma, our friend. She says, do you think the advice, follow your passion, is overrated? What if your passion doesn't pay the bills?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you were on for this. This is where he talked about the concept of ikigai. I do think, and I'm now cliched in saying this because I think most people are like, follow your passion to me is, it's maybe I wouldn't use the word overrated. I think it's just off center by a little bit. Like I think you usually don't know what your full passions are. And so you have to get out there and learn new things. And then it's important to be reflective. And sometimes it's your passion. Sometimes it's combining this with like something that I am good at. Therefore I work harder. I feel better about it. I can make progress, or something that I like a lot. It's not my top passion, but I like it a lot. So it's not like don't follow your passion, but I'd say follow things where work doesn't feel like work, where you're interested. And then ideally, if it's also where you're good, and ideally where it's, things are valued, then you're gonna do better. And everyone has to make the choice. Some people are like, that's why I said everything that comes down to reflection. Like you don't have to pick the most valued thing, like, well, this is where all the money is. You can choose to say, I love skateboarding. And it's, not like people don't value it, but it's not the top thing. And there's a lot of people doing it, but I'm committed to that. And so I'm gonna work in that area, and then you can be successful. So anyway, I'd say resist, follow your passion. I think that's more of a shutdown thing, because people are like, I don't know what my passion is, or it's in such a narrow area. And I'm an example, like I got in somewhere, I was like, I had no idea. I was good at building product, and it's like a passion of mine. I would have never said that before, but once I was in it, I'm like, it's cool, I like it. Yes.
Something that you said earlier really stayed with me, and it was something along the lines of how you teach people to love the problems and not the solutions. And I was just wondering if you have like any like specific tactics that you could share with us that maybe we could implement to also learn how to love.
Yeah, and the good news is there's so much out there now, and I'm not saying you have to buy it, but you can search it and find it. There's a guy who was at Google, I think, who basically, he wrote a book called Mom's Test or Mom Test. Yeah, and it's very similar to what we teach, and I've used it, and there are some examples, and it comes down to that counterintuitive. When you interview people, like you tend to be biased towards, whatever I have, I'm gonna say, no, do you like this? Tell me what you like about it, and you'll say, oh, I don't like this, and you're like, oh no, you don't understand, and then you try to sell it. So there's just questions that more force you to check the passion that you, not eliminate the passion you have, but check it so that you can really tap into what people really like. So I think it's best going out to find Mom Tests and other things and coming up with like learning and practicing the techniques that get you to not anchor in on something too early, not give up on it. You always have to have a passion and like a solution and something that you're shooting for, but then it just takes practice. That's back to the thing. It's not just it's like a muscle you need to develop to just, ask why essentially, as opposed to, continuing to push like this is what, I think the world needs.
Thank you.
Yes.
As someone who is new to the entrepreneurial world, what are the means that you would say of like, how do you navigate like seeing new things and like being updated on like news outlets, but for like specifically entrepreneurship?
Well, yeah, I'd say this is where part of like most good entrepreneurial ideas don't come from listening to people like me and talking about that. It's like comes from customers. And so the more you're out there learning these skills and kind of vetting yourself, so you're more likely to find the problem that's out there. The other is don't be necessarily in a rush to do it. Like we mentioned, networking and networks is good. If you think you want to be entrepreneurial, going and working at a company that's growing, that's entrepreneurial, will give you one, a taste that's easier than starting on your own. Is this something I like? Two, it'll give you the experience because you're seeing something that's a little ahead of where you'll be. Three, it'll give you the network. You might find co-founders, you might find engineers, you might find material science people. So I'd say if you have an interest in entrepreneurship, and I know some of you do this, like, go work at a couple, go volunteer if you have to, go get a job there. And, entrepreneurship doesn't have to come right away. There's no rules. For some people it is, like AI is like there's a whole bunch of young 20-year-old entrepreneurs now like there were 15 years ago. But that, so it's not, I'm not saying you can't do that stuff, but I think the general better path is like learn a little bit more and get exposed to things. And then jump when you feel like, jump a little bit early, but when you have some more experience, yeah.
Follow-up questions to that, sort of like more personal. Where do you balance your formal education and experience? What do you think is more valuable when you're entering this area of expertise?
That's a good question. There's no right answer because it depends what you're doing. I'd say in general, entrepreneurship values broad-based and quick learning. So it's more about you're going to be curious and learn quickly and iterate. That being said, though, if you're going into AI or some area, it's like having technical skills are really important. So there's no right or wrong answer there. And I'd say the best rule is it's best to know the rules before you break the rules. And then when you get really out there, then you can set the rules. So I think it's better to say know the rules of what you're going into enough. Like they talk about good writers, they'll do it if they break the grammar, but they happen to know the grammar. Or Picasso's you look at some of that stuff and you're like, I could do that, but no, he knew how to do something really well. So I'd say get grounded in something enough so that you are conscious that you're breaking something, but then the breaking the rules is going to be what makes you successful.
All right, pretty good.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure to have you. So thank you so much for your time. I think we all learned a lot and it was really cool to hear your insights. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for having me. One pretty tiring for Matt's daughters to walk in, to sort of acknowledge that you saw your dad and you actually have to listen to
He
you
actually
pretty quick.
told us to walk to the Veale Recreation Center, so.
I did, but that was the way in, I think. Anyway, but you found it, yeah.
Glad you made it. Good to have you guys here. Thanks, Matt, for coming back to campus, back to Cleveland. In 2 weeks, we've got a panel for those that are sort of interested in the investing side of entrepreneurship. We have 3 alums on a panel that all were active in our kind of venture community. They're all working in venture capital. So that'll be on September 12th here. And then check our website. We've got all sorts of other programs. We'd love to have you guys here. So thanks everybody for joining and see y'all soon.